This podcast is for those who have felt alienated or excluded and view themselves as exiled followers of Jesus. Today I want to talk about the story of someone who was othered. What does that mean? Well, to other someone means to fail to view that person as one of us, or to stop viewing someone as part of our crowd. We smother their voice when we other them. In this podcast, I want to talk about what that looks like. Welcome to De-Churched. The us I describe may be our nation, our race, our tribe, our group, our club, and so on and so forth. We other refugees because they are, quote, not like us. And it can happen more subtly. You maybe leave a church and those in the church didn't know how to handle you and now don't know how to handle the fact that you have left. This is vividly illustrated for me by the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus, of course, tells this story, and it goes like this. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite, a religious man, showed up. He also avoided the injured man. But a Samaritan traveling the road came to him, and when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds, and then he lifted him onto his donkey. He led him to an inn and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." Imagine you are that man at the side of the road. You're left for dead. You're injured. You're in bandit country. You're almost naked. You've lost all the tribal clothing markers that says, "I'm a Jew." You're alone. How do you feel? Well, you feel very fragile. You feel close to the edge, literally, of losing everything. And then, of course, along comes the religious community leader, the priest. But his tight religious rules of identity don't allow him to come close to a dead body. And also don't allow him to help someone who's not a Jew. And he can't work out whether you are or not. You don't have your tribal clothes on. And he says to himself, "I can't help you because ... Maybe he says, "You shouldn't have been traveling down this road alone. I will become contaminated if I touch you. I'm not really sure you're one of God's people, and I mustn't help Gentiles." And so he passes by, gives you a really wide berth, in fact. How do you feel at that point? You're saying to yourself, the person I relied upon as a leader has let me down. I feel betrayed. What a hypocrite. I feel angry. Am I not one of the flock? Did I lose my identity as part of the tribe or people because I lost some of the clothes? Now remember this, clothes historically are often an identifier of a particular community. They were, even when I was growing up. You would have punk rockers and rockers and different styles of clothing depending on what sort of music you listened to and what sort of group you were in. And still to this day amongst hip hop artists, there's a style of dress, there's bling, there's attitude and so on. And there used to be very little crossover. There's a lot more so these days in the different types of music communities. But I remember Bono, the singer from U2, saying this: U2 were too cool to say they liked the music of ABBA back in the day. Clothes are an identifier, a signifier of your story, who you are, what tradition you come from. Next along the road comes an ordinary community member. He's still part of your community and he's not on duty like the priest might have been, but he's part of your community and surely he's going to help. He doesn't have quite the same religious restrictions on him, and so he comes a bit closer, the passage says. But no, he also walks on by. Maybe this ordinary person didn't want to imply criticism of the priest's decision not to help. You see, you can see a long way on the road, and it's a very steep road down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Maybe he didn't have a donkey or a horse like the priest would have, but of course he could have given first aid. How do you feel when you've been let down by a leader, of your community and by regular members. It's alienating. It's isolating. You're asking if it's your tribe anymore. Do you fit in anymore? And then, of course, along comes the hero, the Samaritan. And yet this would have been the most surprising hero to Jesus' audience. The Samaritans were a hated and despised cult. They were not quite Jews. They were not quite Gentiles. They were kind of mongrels, half-breeds, heretics. That's how they were viewed, like a member of IS. They would have expected this guy to not only pass by, but to give him a kick as he went by. And yet he stoops to help the wounded man. He gets down in the dirt, in the donkey poo and animal filth and the blood, and hauls the man up onto his transport. He is at risk himself of also being mugged, and yet he gives of his time, his energy, and his resources. And in fact, Jesus frames the story to show how he does all the things that the priest, the ordinary Jew, and the robbers didn't do. And he commits to care for the long haul. You know, I have known those who have found more understanding from people of no faith or another faith than their Christian community. And that really isn't to bag out the church, but just to be real about what some of us have felt. And to say sometimes as the church, we have failed to have as wide arms as Jesus. Sometimes we have thought that our role was to be guardians of the truth rather than lovers of the broken. There's a Greek word, amplias, from which we get amplification. It means wider, bigger. It's actually used of a person in the book of Romans, Mr. Big, maybe. We need to widen and make bigger our sense of what the love of God is. The person at the side of the road is othered, made an outsider. And ironically, it's an outsider who helps him. Jesus comes to us sometimes as the one at the side of the road, rejected by many of his own people. He knows what it means to be an outsider. He can identify with people who have been othered. But also he is the one who comes to us to bind up our wounds and wants to draw near to those who have been othered. Again and again, Jesus refers to the outsider to make a point. Women, the tax collector, the Gentiles, the Samaritans, and so on and so forth. And what's the underlying message of that? God's love is wide enough, big enough to include those who have been othered by the religious community. If I can allegorize this just a little bit, the person at the side of the road is like those who have been mugged by a series of crises. Maybe the punches that rain down on them are hard questions, or a crisis of faith caused by suffering, or a new way of thinking, or living that wasn't orthodox according to that particular faith community. And then just when they've been left shell-shocked and beaten at the side of the road, along comes the faith community, and they don't help and even make it worse. Why did that happen? I would suggest there's perhaps a number of reasons, but because most of all for me, it would seem that the default philosophy wasn't love and welcome and inclusion, but tight boundary markers that defined insiders and outsiders. Border patrols checking on behavior and correct doctrine, armed guards with Alsatians making sure you conform to behavioral norms of our way of thinking. So what's the alternative? Aren't truth and boundary markers important? We'll find out more next time. Don't forget to join us on our Facebook page to be part of the conversation. But in this last few seconds, take a moment to acknowledge God's presence. Think of this Greek word, amplias, bigger, larger, and hear these words from another rabbi. May you have the power to understand, as all God's people should, how wide, how long, how high, and how deep his love is. Ephesians 3, verse 18. This space is one of welcome. Let's keep traveling together as the De-Churched.